Afternoon, everybody. Just a real quick note at the top here, a scheduling item. The Secretary is going to be traveling next week to Chicago on the 26th. He'll deliver remarks at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. At the Chicago Council, the Secretary will discuss the United States' current international objectives and role in the world moving forward. At the University of Chicago, the Secretary will sit down with some students for a conversation to reflect on his time as Secretary of State, his long career in public service, the role of the United States in an increasingly complicated world, and obviously what comes next for the rest of this administration and beyond. So we look forward to that. Some of those events are open press. We'll give you all the details if you need it as we get a little closer. Matt.
Right. Let's start with some comments the Secretary made this morning, which have attracted some interest. Unusually brought up during a meeting with the Kuwaiti foreign minister, but they're about North Korea. And I wanted to know what the Secretary meant when he spoke of the illegal and illegitimate government of North Korea. Is this some kind of hint or signal that the U.S. position towards North Korea is getting harder, sharper?
I think our position on North Korea has been sufficiently tough for a long, long time. I don't think I would read into what he said as signaling any kind of a change. We've been pretty clear and pretty specific about the unlawful activities of the regime on many different levels. So I wouldn't read more into it than that, but also I wouldn't read less into it either. I mean, we have obviously been very concerned about regime provocative activities and the destabilizing influence that they have on the peninsula.
Well, but that's not quite what he said. He didn't say the acts, the illegal and illegitimate acts of the North Korean government. He said the illegal and illegitimate government of North Korea. Does the U.S. believe that the government of North Korea is illegal?
Doesn't one become illegal by your acts? I mean, I don't think, I think you're reading way too much into this, Matt. I mean, I think by any measure, just look at what this regime is doing, starving their own people, trying to develop nuclear weapons capabilities, threatening to use weapons of mass destructions on the peninsula. I mean, we could go on and on and on. I think he was simply stating the obvious, and I wouldn't read more into it than that.
So are you saying that he was referring to the actions of the North Korean government?
The actions of the North Korean regime are what give the international community such concern, and he was speaking to the fact that those actions, the provocative behavior that the regime continues to display are absolutely in violations of violations of international law.
Okay, but when you refer to a government as an illegal government, that could suggest some kind of regime change policy.
Nothing's changed about our policy with respect to what we want to see on the peninsula, which is complete, verifiable denuclearization and a return to the six-party talk process.
Could you
Quick follow-up
on that? Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, do you believe that Kim Jong-un has lost the legitimacy to lead North
I'm
Korea?
going to leave the Secretary's statements as stated.
Could you just more specifically go into what he was talking about with Kuwait's role? What are you expecting? I mean, we don't hear too much Kuwait and North Korea in the same sentence.
Yeah, well, look, I think, he was referring to a longstanding concern we've had about how to curtail the DPRK's nuclear ballistic missile proliferation programs through an effort of comprehensive and sustained pressure by the international community. And we've also been very, very open about the fact that North Korea's export of labor generates significant revenue for the government, and it enables, in fact, the development of those very programs. So we've raised our concerns, and we'll continue to do so with governments about the use of workers from North Korea in their countries, and that's what he's referring to.
John?
Yeah.
On the same statement but different topic, the Secretary asked by Samir on Lebanon in the morning, and he said that we obviously hope that Lebanon will move, but I'm not certain what the outcomes will be from the support that Saad Hariri is offering. we hope they can move forward. What does he mean by that? Did he mean that he hopes that the Lebanese parliament move forward with the election of General Aoun as the president?
Though he was saying that what we hope will happen is that they'll be able to have an election and install a president. That, I mean, this is a country that hasn't had a president for what now, 2 years, and it's important that the people of Lebanon, their voices be heard, and that's what he's referring to. The process moving forward.
Does the U.S. support the election of General Aoun?
We support the Lebanese people having the chance to have a vote and have a voice in who is their president. That's what we support.
General Aoun is supported too by Hezbollah, who you consider as a terrorist organization. Do you have any issue on this?
Nothing's changed about our designation of Hezbollah or their activities. And they are a terrorist organization. But again, who ultimately becomes president of Lebanon is up to the Lebanese people. And we're going to respect that process.
Can we go to Syria?
Sure.
First of all, yeah, go ahead.
Last thing, do you expect that the elections will happen in the upcoming 10
I think the
days?
secretary was clear about that today too. I mean, we couldn't possibly predict that, but we think it's important for the elections to move forward and to do so as soon as possible. Even the secretary wasn't going to speculate this morning about when that might be, and certainly not going to speculate about what the result might be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go to Syria. The status of the ceasefire and the humanitarian aid.
Wait a second. Wait. That's all right.
Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
if you have to get it, I just want to make sure. Go ahead.
Oh, we'll wait. I don't wanna get- Okay.
No, it's all right.
Take it
I
from
think
the
he's.
top.
I think he turned it off.
I wanted to ask you because it seems that the militias in eastern Aleppo are disallowing aid from coming in. They're disallowing people from going out and so on. These are the claims. I wonder if you have anything to clarify what is going on.
Actually, I don't, Saeed. I've seen some reporting on that as well. If it's true, it's obviously of deep concern to us. I mean, one of the reasons why this humanitarian pause was put in place, and that's what it's being referred to, temporary, as we talked about yesterday, was to allow for that exact thing to happen, for aid to get in. And so reports that we've seen that aid is being obstructed obviously is of deep concern. But I can't confirm, that that's happening exactly where or who might be holding it up.
Because also reports say that the Syrian army pulled away from the Castello Road to allow for aid to go in, but for some reason it's not going on. It's not going in.
Yeah.
People are not taking advantage to leave through the opening
Right.
that the Syrian government offered and so on. Are you in touch with the Russians on these issues?
Well, as I think the Secretary mentioned yesterday, he did have a conversation with Foreign Minister Lavrov yesterday. They did talk about the situation in Aleppo in general. But if you're asking me, are we in touch with the Russians specifically about these reports of aid convoys being obstructed, I'm not aware of any specific discussions about that today. It is something that we have been in touch with our other partners in the region on, in terms of allowing that aid to get through. So again, I can't confirm that it's not happening. Obviously, it's of concern if it's true, and you can expect that we'll continue to have the kinds of conversations we need to have with our partners to make sure that it isn't opposition groups who might be holding that up.
And my last question is regarding the extension of the ceasefire till Monday. The Russians said that they will, extend it till
Yeah.
Monday or through Monday. But on the other hand, if no aid is going in, what would be? I mean, of course, the cessation of bombardments and so on, give a breather to the people. But it is not, it is not meeting the requirements in terms of medical aid, food,
Right.
and so on.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's you have to have both. I mean, you're not going to get humanitarian aid if the bombing is continuing, right? So they're connected. So we want both. And like I said at the beginning of the week, we welcome the humanitarian pause that was announced. Thus far, it does seem to be holding. We aren't seeing the aid in general the way we'd want to see. I can't confirm again the specific reports you cited, but obviously we want to see more aid getting in. And I've also seen the reports of this extension, which of course we welcome. If in fact it can lead to the delivery of much needed food, water, and medicine to the people of Aleppo. So we're going to be watching this very, very closely. I can't rule out that the Secretary wouldn't have additional conversations heading into the weekend on this. We'll have to see where it goes. At the same time, and separately, the multilateral discussions in Geneva continue to try to get to something that's more enduring, more sustainable, even beyond Aleppo, so that we can take the steps necessary to get the political talks back on track. So just to clarify, what we're talking about here is a very temporary, discrete humanitarian pause in Aleppo to allow for aid to get in, and that is important. And as I said, we welcome reports that the pause has largely held and may be extended. It has to be married up with humanitarian assistance getting in, but even that isn't enough, and it's not what we're focused on in Geneva, which is getting something much more sustainable.
Geneva, yesterday the Secretary said that there was perhaps, and he said he underscored the word perhaps, some progress in the talks in Geneva yesterday. Do you now believe there has been progress, and if so, of what sort?
I don't want to get ahead of the discussions, but I would, again, wouldn't want to extrapolate much from the Secretary's comments. I think he was giving you a fair and honest appraisal of how the talks are going, and there has been some progress. There are still issues to be ironed out. There are still gaps. There's still areas where we are all not in agreement, and I think the teams are going to continue to work through those. But there has been some progress, and we hope that in the coming days, obviously we hope that we can get there, that we can get a meaningful ceasefire in place that can not only get humanitarian aid much more firmly established, but get the political talks back on track. So we'll see. I just wouldn't want to speculate one way or another.
And can you,
Can I follow up on that?
Well, I think Arshad's got a quick one, and then I'll go back to you.
just small one, if you could shed any light at all beyond your hopes to eventually get a ceasefire in place on kind of what progress there may have been, where things have gone forward a little bit.
Well, without getting into the specifics, as I really don't want to litigate this here from the podium. The teams are hashing out the specifics of what a meaningful, to be read successful, ceasefire can look like. And you know, Arshad, you've covered this. I mean, it is exactly that issue. You know, when's it start? How long does it last? Where does it apply? Who's got to do what? All those, the guts of what a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities can look like have been thorny issues to work through. And to be fair, we haven't been all that successful at doing this in the past, which is why the Secretary, I think, took a very cautious tone about this. And he remains cautious about it. But it is those logistics, the mechanics, how do you actually do it that the teams are talking about now. And as I said, very honestly, there's still not universal agreement by everybody on what this can look like and how it would be implemented, and certainly not even, when. So they're still at it, and the Secretary is going to stay plugged in. He's going to stay informed by the team on how things are going, and we hope in coming days that that we can get there. But that's really as far as I'm able to go right now, since the talks are very much a live action.
I'm wondering if you can just kind of flesh out a little bit about the not discrepancy, but like how much of this is a U.S.-Russia kind of negotiation versus the multilateral. I mean, as you know, you broke off kind of bilateral talks with the Russians in terms of trying to get a ceasefire. And I know that you say that this is a more multilateral ceasefire. I'm just, where are things in terms of, U.S. and Russia working together on this, even though you have cut off talks on this, bilateral talks on the ceasefire, the Secretary is still talking to Foreign Minister Lavrov frequently.
Sure.
So if you could just kind of paint a picture of what's really going on.
Sure, I appreciate the question. It is very much a multilateral effort. And the meetings in Geneva followed directly from the conversation that they had at the ministerial level in Lausanne last weekend.
These are teams from all of the countries that were there?
I Pretty much all of them. I
It's
can't.
not just the U.S. and
It's
Russia.
no, absolutely not. The meetings in Geneva are not U.S.-Russia bilateral engagements on the ceasefire, the cessation of hostilities in Syria. They are multilateral, and so the representatives are from most, if not all, and I can check on that, most, if not all.
Is that including Iran?
Again, I can check on representation, but I can tell you for sure that it's not just U.S. and Russia. The suspension of U.S.-Russia bilateral engagement on the cessation of hostilities in Syria remains in effect. That doesn't mean, as I've said,
It's not really a suspension, though. It's more like an expansion into a multilateral forum.
no, I disagree,
Well, I mean-
Elise. It is a suspension. The Secretary is not having bilateral engagement with Foreign Minister Lavrov on this specific issue, and more importantly, our
You
teams.
just spoke to him this morning.
Of course, they're going to have a dialogue. What I'm saying is they aren't sitting across the table as they were in Geneva in September, actually trying to negotiate the particulars.
Well, they're not
That is
trying
now
to-
being done. That is now being done by a multilateral team in Geneva, and that's what they're doing. But I want to be clear, and I said it at the time. It doesn't mean that we're not going to talk to Foreign Minister Lavrov. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to talk to the Russians about what's going on in Syria. It would be foolhardy to do that, since they have such a huge influence on the Assad regime, and they're huge stakeholders in the process. What it means is, with respect to the cessation of hostilities, we are now moving towards a more multilateral format, which obviously does include Russia. So there's, of course, going to be conversations with them inside of that.
But I mean, even when he's talking to Foreign Minister Lavrov in these conversations, they're still talking about this multilateral
Sure.
ceasefire.
Sure, but they aren't doing
So
they
you're
aren't
just
doing
saying-
individual bilateral negotiations over the particulars the way they were before.
Over the phone.
Well,
They're
isn't-
doing this over the phone instead of sitting.
No, that's not what I said.
But is
Michelle.
this? I mean, I know you did it in the beginning because the Russians were not being cooperative, and you felt that. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to say it was a punishment to Russia, but it was more of a kind of acknowledgement that it wasn't productive. But I
The
mean,
suspension?
suspension.
Correct.
But I mean, isn't this more of a productive way of doing it, considering the U.S. and Russia are not the only parties in there? And
I think that remains to be seen how productive it's going to be. I think that's what we got to figure out in Geneva right now. If this can be more productive. Clearly, we felt that U.S.-Russia bilateral engagement was a good vehicle to try to get a cessation of hostilities, and it didn't work. And it didn't work because Russia didn't meet their commitments. And so yes, we
so
suspended
what
it.
makes you think that Russia's going to meet its commitments now that there are other countries involved?
I don't know that they will. I can't predict that. I think that's a better question put to people in Moscow. What I can tell you is the Secretary's not going to give up on the effort. And since we have suspended U.S.-Russia bilateral engagement on this particular issue, we are left. We always had multilateral vehicles at the same time, but now we're left with that as the only process to pursue. And we'll see where it goes. As I mentioned to Arshad, I mean, we'll know in coming days, how successful that's going to be. I couldn't possibly predict the result, and I wouldn't be able to predict Russia's willingness and ability to meet whatever new commitments might fall on them as a result of this discussion.
Could you update us on the situation regarding Turkish attacks on Syrian Kurds? There are reports today from the news media and the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights that say that SDF-held areas, including Kurdish villages, were pounded with missile, artillery, and airstrikes. I know yesterday you said all parties should focus on fighting ISIS and called for no uncoordinated movements,
Yep.
but it doesn't seem that Turkey is paying much attention.
I've seen reports on about this. I'm not in a position to confirm their accuracy, but I would like to reiterate what I said yesterday because it's still germane today. That we've called on all parties to refrain from uncoordinated movements. We, as I said last night, I think on Twitter, we didn't have any role in any way, or nor did we coordinate any reported airstrikes by Turkey or any movements in the area by Kurdish or Arab forces. Contrary, I think there was some reporting out there that we had. That's just not true. We believe that all military activities in this very crowded area must closely be coordinated. And uncoordinated military activity by any party or any group carries risks of escalation with innocent civilians caught in the middle. So again, I've seen the reports. I'm not in a position to confirm them. I try to stay away from operational day-to-day assessments. But our message yesterday is the same message that message today is the same one we had yesterday.
If they were true, what would your response be?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate about hypotheticals. I think we've been very clear about what our hopes and expectations are for everybody involved in the coalition to counter Daesh. And that's to focus on that common enemy. And that uncoordinated activity is counterproductive to that effort.
Can I have one more on Russia and
Yeah.
Syria? I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but this Russia flotilla that's on its way to Syria is, you know, really, it's one of the biggest naval kind of naval force deployments since the end of the Cold War, and only signifies that maybe Russia's going to intensify its strikes against the targets that it's been targeting already, such as opposition members. I mean, how does that jive with the conversations that you're having in terms of a cessation of hostilities?
Precisely, Elise. I mean, you asked me, your last question was, what makes you think that there's going to be a change? And I said I couldn't predict that.
Well, there is going to be a change, and it's going to be, it
Well-
looks like, based on the deployment that Russia's having, they're only looking to intensify their involvement.
Well, I can't speak for the Russian Defense Ministry
But
and what they're doing with
would
their
you acknowledge
ships.
that that's what that
We've
signifies?
certainly seen reports of this naval deployment, and the Secretary spoke about this himself just the other day when asked about it. And what he said was that if it's true that they're moving more naval and air power into the Mediterranean with the intent on furthering or completing, or however you want to phrase it, the siege of Aleppo, that is counterproductive to the larger effort of a peaceful solution in Syria. It's only going to exacerbate more conflict. It's only going to create more terrorists, and it's only going to make much more elusive any kind of political talks and diplomatic solution to the conflict there. But I can't predict where Russian Navy ships are going to go and what they're going to do. I've seen the reports of this, and again, I think the Secretary
How much-
responded to that already.
I mean, given what many of the government agencies have said about Russia's involvement in some of the hacking and the leaking of, information, and some of their other activities, how much of this do you think that Russia is trying to take advantage of this election period and the period before a new president takes office to try and increase its activity because it feels like there won't be any consequences?
Well, I can't predict their ultimate conclusions, but the intelligence community has talked about the fact that we do assess that they want to, at the very least, sow doubt about the solidity, the firm establishment of our electoral process. That appears to at least be one goal. But what their end result that they might be seeking as a result of this, I couldn't
I'm
speak
just
to.
wondering to what extent do you think any of this is related, that this election period, which is obviously a very chaotic period in any time, but obviously this particular election season is very chaotic. Then there'll be a period between when a new president is elected and a new president takes office. Do you fear that the Russians are trying to exploit this kind of chaotic election period and period until the inauguration for further action inside Syria?
It's hard to know with any great specificity what their aims might be from a geopolitical perspective, pre-election, post-election, and I think only they can speak to that. All I can say is that we do believe that, at least through the cyber intrusions we've seen, that they're at the very least trying to sow doubt and discord amongst the American people about our electoral process. And on Syria, and I honestly don't know to the degree their activities in Syria are related to that obvious intention to sow doubt. But clearly what we're seeing in Syria is not a concerted effort to try to contribute to a peaceful solution. So again, we'll have to see where things go in Geneva. Our hope is that in this new multilateral format, the Russians can make commitments and then follow through on those commitments. Equally so, we would like to see everybody meet whatever commitments that they make. with respect to trying to get a cessation of hostilities. It's incumbent upon everybody, not least of which, of course, Russia and the regime. But I think your question is better posed to officials in Moscow in terms of what their, if there are some sort of ultimate objectives here, what they are. All I can tell you is that we're focused on making sure that we move the political process forward in Syria, and that we prepare for a smooth transition here in Washington to the new administration, whichever one that may be.
Can I ask a technical question on election Russia and so on? Because there was a report that the Russian consulate, either in Houston, in Texas, and in Louisiana, and so on, they asked to observe the elections and they were denied that. Do they do this through the State Department or they do it with the state? And how does this happen?
I think
And you have any comment on that?
I think Mark commented on this.
Oh, this is just today. I mean, you know, they were turned down.
I'm sorry?
Today. Apparently, they put in a request and they were turned down today.
Well-
You know, from observing.
Yeah.
Is that,
So let me go through this, and then I think so individual parties, foreign governments, NGOs are all welcome to apply to our state governments to observe elections. The individual states maintain the authority to approve or deny requests from parties to observe elections. They do that on their own. We understand that the Russian embassy intended to approach local authorities for assistance observing elections. Russian officials also had an opportunity to join the OSCE observation mission. In September, U.S. officials participated in the OSCE observation mission to the Russian parliamentary elections. That's a process by which this can be done as well. The fact that they have chosen to not join the OSCE observation mission makes clear, again, I think as Mark said, that this issue is nothing more than a PR stunt. Now, I can't speak to the individual states, and whatever their consulates have asked for or not, that is for the states to speak to and for the Russian government, the Russian embassy here in Washington to speak to. But we've made very clear that they're welcome to do that in accordance with established procedures.
Do you know when you say we understand that they were going to approach various localities? Do you know which ones, and how do you understand that?
We've been given that understanding from the embassy here, but I don't have the list of who they have approached, and that's for the states to speak to, not us.
Regardless, I mean, yes, it is a state by state decision about who they want to have observing their elections, but has the department given guidance as to, in terms of whether or not they should accept observers from certain countries?
We have not, to my knowledge, we've not dictated any kind of guidance to the states with respect to any one particular observer.
Have any states approached
country.
you to ask?
To the states.
I'm asking
You asked if
country.
we had
So
given any guidance
say-
to the states.
Let's make this incredibly hypothetical.
I love those kinds of
Country
questions.
X, which is a horrible dictatorship and that you disagree with, it's on your state sponsors of terrorism list. It does all sorts of bad things. They want to send an observer to state Y for the election. Are you saying that the State Department would not suggest to that U.S. state that they not accept
I'm
an
not an
observer?
expert on the process, so I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take that question
Okay.
to see
I just
if
want to know
we do that.
if you guys
Certainly,
give.
I certainly think that if we're asked for advice and counsel from states, that we would provide it, but we're not in the business of dictating to them who
okay.
they will have
Well, so-
observe or not.
Okay, so then can you take the question, did you give any advice to states that got, that they're getting these requests as to who
I'll-
might be appropriate, what countries might be appropriate, or, I don't know, or inappropriate, the case may be?
I'll take the question.
Thank you.
Well, I don't understand why it has to be hypothetical. I mean, you've just from this podium 10 minutes ago, you talked about how U.S. intelligence agencies have said, and you yourself said, that you believe that Russia wants to interfere at this election. And now it's calling to send monitors to the United States. And why can't you yesterday or the other day, Mark called it a stunt. I mean, I don't understand why you can't say that you would be not encouraging something like this.
Because with respect to Russia, we didn't discourage. As I said, I'm not aware of any guidance that we gave to the states with respect to Russia specifically. As I said, and I also said, and Mark said, that they were advised that they were welcome to consult directly with the states on this, and they were also advised that they were welcome to join the OSCE observation mission.
I don't understand why they would be. I mean, I understand that it's a state by state. I understand elections are a state issue, but I also understand that the federal government is accusing Russia of being involved in trying to meddle in the election. So why would you not come down firmly on the
Because
side
we've also
of
said
saying that they're not welcome?
Because we've also said that we're very confident in the stability, the security, and the strength of our electoral process. There's no reason to hide from that.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't have. I'm not saying that you're not welcoming monitors, but do you really think that any Russian monitor that would come here, already having tried to meddle in the election, according to you, would have a fair and unbiased view of whether the election was rigged or not?
I can't speak for what every observer, and they're observers, not monitors. That I can't speak for what views they might have of it. What I'm saying is we don't run away from observers coming to our country.
That you do, but would you,
well, you're
would
suggesting
you want,
that we should have
no,
discouraged
I'm just
Russia.
specifically talking about Russian observers.
And I think I've answered it. We told the Russian government that they were welcome to observe our election. There are two processes to do that. You can go to the states directly, or you can join the OSCE observation mission. We made it very clear that they were welcome to do that. And there was no admonition, I will double check on this, but I'm not aware of any advice or guidance that was given from the State Department to the states with respect to their own decisions about accepting Russian observers. That's for them to decide. But we made it very clear to Russian officials that they had the opportunity, just like other nation states have the opportunity to observe our election. And I think to your question, well, why wouldn't you advise against it, given that they have shown a proclivity, at least through cyberspace, to try to sow discord and lack of confidence in our system? It's because we are so confident in it, and there's nothing to hide from it. We're not worried about that because we're confident the electoral process is secure and it's safe, and these will be free and fair elections.
But generally, you're confident also in the monitors that come over here and that they're, acting in good faith. Are you confident that Russian monitors coming here would act in good faith?
They're observers, again, not monitors, and the states run this. When it's done through the states run that process, and each state can speak to their procedures for how they handle observers and what observers are allowed to do. They are observers that they can watch. They're not participants in the process. The OSCE runs the same protocol. Again, they can speak more specifically to how it's done. But there's nothing for us to fear from having Russian observers observing our election. But those requests that go to the states are for the states to decide. We've got nothing to fear, nothing to hide from that.
So is it unfortunate that some states at least have refused Russian observers?
We're not characterizing those decisions. Those are decisions that the states make, and we respect that. That's the way it's always been. It's the way it will continue.
Your advice is to welcome them and that you've got nothing to fear.
I thought you were going to look into whether you're giving advice or not.
Your question was if we giving advice, and I don't think we are. I will check on that. This isn't about advice, Dave. The question was, why wouldn't you try to discourage? Because my answer is we don't have anything to hide.
Yes.
And the elections,
But
and we're
that's-
confident in the electoral
That's your
system.
advice to us today, but is
No,
that
it's
also
not.
your
It's
advice
not.
to the state?
It's not advice. I was asked a question about why wouldn't we be concerned about Russian observers, and that was my answer. These are decisions that the states have to make on their own. Okay.
John, can we go back to Syria and Russia?
Yeah, go ahead.
Russian foreign minister has said today that the West is using al-Nusra to topple Assad. Are you doing that?
I don't think that a rebuttal to that is required. It's completely false. I can't even. I don't think the charge even merits a response. Yeah.
On Philippines, following up on the opening discussion yesterday, President Duterte returned home from Beijing after signing tens of billions of dollars of deals with the Chinese. and explained that his separation comment doesn't mean a cutting of diplomatic ties with the United States, and as far as the mutual defense treaties, he'll consult with his military and police. Does that give you any sense of relief after the initial comments?
I think I would just fall back to what I said yesterday. This is an alliance that means a lot to us. We are going to stay committed to it. We're focused on meeting our commitments, not only under that mutual defense treaty, but on so many other sectors, throughout so many other sectors to the Filipino people, and that's what we're focused on. And I'll let President Duterte speak for his comments. As I said yesterday, when we heard what he initially said in Beijing, it was confusing, and we would be interested in hearing a deeper explanation of what it meant. Now we said today, and we'll see where the conversations go this weekend when Assistant Secretary Russell gets over there.
Can I go to the Palestinian-Israeli issue very quickly?
Sure.
Yeah. The Israeli press is reporting that you and Egypt have warned the Palestinians not to push Security Council on settlement before U.S. election. Have you done that, or do you have any
Our
comment on that?
position on action at the UN, as you know, remains the same. There's been no change. At this point, we continue to work with the international community to try to advance our shared goal of achieving a negotiated two-state solution, which is the only way to achieve a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace.
But you have not warned the Palestinians directly or indirectly that they should not do this at the present time or until after the election.
I'm not going to comment on every press report. Our
you have,
position,
like, any time?
our position with respect to action at the UN remains the same.
You have any timetable as to what time should the Palestinians should submit anything on the settlement?
I've got
Okay.
nothing more to say.
One
on
more
that.
question. Yesterday, the Israelis shot up a boy, 15 years old. They said that he was throwing stones, but they shot him in the back. Do you have any comment on that?
I've seen.
Is that excessive use of force?
I'm sorry.
Is that an excessive use of force?
So, obviously, we've seen the report. I don't have the full details of everything that happened, Saeed. We continue to urge all sides to reject the violence, to take affirmative steps to reduce the tensions, to improve the situation on the ground. As for excessive force in general, as we've said many times, we're always concerned about any credible reports of excessive use of force against civilians. I'm not going to characterize this in particular since the reports are still coming in about what happened here, and I'm not in a position to be able to verify the details of it. But as always, we believe it's critical that every possible measure be taken to protect civilians and to de-escalate tensions.
But the Israelis are not doing that. I mean, it happened the day before. There was a woman that shot at the checkpoint. In fact, there was a meeting at the UN a couple of days ago by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, where they said that Israel, does all these things with impunity and so on. And you don't think that Israel has regularly used excessive force to neutralize, as they call it, to neutralize Palestinian teenagers and rock throwers or demonstrators?
Again, we've spoken to this many times, Saeed. We're concerned about any credible allegations of excessive use of force, and we don't believe that that additional violence of any kind is getting us any closer to a two-state solution. We want leadership on both sides here.
Sticking with reports of excessive use of force, the United Nations today said that Congolese security services had shot, burned, beat, and hacked to death at least 48 civilians during last month's protests against the extension of President Kabila's mandate. So this is about the violence last month, not the last couple of days. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, if it's true, obviously it's deeply disturbing, but I'm not in a position to verify those reports. I can tell you that we are and will stay in close touch with officials there and try to learn more about these allegations, but I just don't have anything more than that. But if it is true, obviously the United States considers that deeply disturbing.
Yesterday, Secretary Kerry said that after his meeting with Mr. Al-Jaber that the JASTA law presents a danger to U.S. interests and that he's working to fix it. Obviously, we know the administration's position on the law before it was passed, but it has been passed now. What can be done?
Well, I think what the Secretary is referring to was that we're going to continue to to speak with members of Congress about our concerns over the law. Look, you're right, it's the law of the land, and we understand that, and we obey the law, and we will obey this law. There's no dispute about that. But we still have concerns about it, and many of our partners, some of whom are even in places like Europe, some of our closest allies, have lingering concerns about this. And so we're going to continue to engage and discuss the law and its implementation going forward with members of Congress. But other than that, I don't have any more specifics to
But the
offer.
only way it could be changed would be if Congress was to re-legislate.
Well, I'm not going to speculate about outcomes. It is the law of the land. It has been passed, and we will obey the law. But that doesn't mean that we're going to shut off communication or dialogue with members of Congress about our concerns about the law itself and about implementation.
Isn't it the case that the administration is pushing for revisions to be made?
We are going to continue to try to address our concerns about the law and how the law is going to be implemented.
Yeah, but
And that was
but
the
the only
that was
way
what
you
the
can-
Secretary is referring to.
I understand that. The only way you can do that is if you convince them to revise it. Right? I mean, either you're seeking a change, a legislative fix, using the Secretary's word fix, or you're not, and you're going to enforce it as is.
That it's unconstitutional or something. I mean, presumably you could try using the courts against it, but
As I said, I'm not going to talk about specific vehicles or approaches. The Secretary, we have long made clear our concerns about this law.
Right.
It is the law.
Right.
So we're going to have to obey the law. That doesn't mean that our concerns have gone away or that we're not going to continue to try to work with members of Congress to have our concerns addressed. Now, how that gets done, there are many ways if you were going to pursue changes to it. And I think the Secretary wants to have open, honest discussions with members of Congress about how to do that.
Can I follow up on a Kerry Joubert meeting yesterday, you know? 'Cause, what is the status of the review? Did the Secretary talk with the Saudi Foreign Minister about the Yemen review that you guys were, I guess you took up like a couple of weeks ago or so?
The review that we announced in the wake of that strike is ongoing.
On the bombing of the mourners.
Huh?
On the bombing that took place a couple of
That
weeks ago.
review's ongoing. I would remind you, though, that we always review, just as a matter of practice, aid and assistance that go to foreign countries. So we're still in the process of working our way through that. Clearly, they talked about what's going on in Yemen. I don't know that they specifically addressed issues of the review of aid and assistance. But I don't know that they would really need to discuss our review of aid and assistance, since it's obvious to the Saudis and to the U.S. side that we're doing that.
So are the Saudis doing the investigation, and have they given you any result as to what is the status
As I
of
understand it, the
investigation?
investigation's ongoing, and I wouldn't speak to the details of that.
They put out a statement over the weekend saying that it was concluded, and they
Yes,
admitted
I'm
that it
sorry.
was a mistake but they said it was a mistake due to bad information by the.
Yeah.
Is that
You're right.
correct, or is
Nope,
there
you're right.
or
That
is
was
there a
wrong.
review?
You're right.
So
There was initial results that we welcomed. We considered it an important first step towards better understanding the events of that day. So
Well,
this was
okay.
an initial result of the
okay, so you
investigation.
so
as far as I know, there's still-
broader investigation into it is still ongoing.
That's my understanding.
And is it your understanding that that includes some kind of accountability formula
I
method?
don't know.
All right.
That's a question better put to the Saudis.
Okay, but in terms of the U.S. review that you said you were undertaking in the wake of this, the attack on the funeral, is that still ongoing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Got time for a couple more.
Deputy Secretary Blinken was at the Paris conference on Mosul that was just held. Could you give us a readout on what happened there, his meetings, and the general conclusion?
Yep, hang on a second. I have it here somewhere. So his meeting focused on the Mosul campaign and ensuring that we are prepared for what comes after the liberation of Mosul, to include humanitarian assistance and stabilization support. He discussed the need for the global coalition to continue to coordinate closely in support of this Iraqi-led effort. The Deputy Secretary commended the Iraqi security forces and their initial progress in Mosul and the brave sacrifices of both the ISF and the Peshmerga. And he had good bilateral meetings on the side with French and other officials, including Iraqi Foreign Minister Jafari. Yep, this will be the last one. Go ahead.
Thank you. Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. On Venezuela, regarding the latest events there, especially because the government canceled any possibility of a recall referendum to revoke President Maduro's mandate. Do you have any position? And second one, I believe that the U.S. is supporting a dialogue in Venezuela, and most of the Venezuelans are asking what for. So if you can answer
Well,
these two questions.
the answer to the second one is to help see a better future for the Venezuelan people.
Well,
And the fact that we've been calling for dialogue is nothing new. We've been saying that for many, many months. And the answer to what for is to try to see that the Venezuelan people have a better future in front of them, a more
the
prosperous, a
dialogue
more
is between
secure
the
future.
government and who?
And opposition leaders.
Well, but taking into account the current development, so what
Well,
is
I
your
mean,
position?
look, I detect a note of skepticism in your question.
It's not
all
mine,
I can,
not only mine. I am not alone. I promise.
but that doesn't mean that we don't still want to see dialogue moving toward a better future for the Venezuelan people. On your question about the recall referendum, we are deeply concerned by the decision of Venezuela's National Electoral Council to halt the recall referendum process. By doing so, we believe that the CNE, the National Electoral Council, prevents the Venezuelan people from exercising their important constitutional right. The Venezuelan people face increasingly severe humanitarian, political, and economic challenges. Regrettably, we believe this decision is indicative of the Council's polarization and the extent to which it is being used to block the Venezuelan people's ability to exercise their constitutional democratic right, to determine the direction of their country. So
Do you see any actions in the frame of the Organization of American States?
I don't have anything specific in terms of next steps here with respect to OAS. I mean, obviously, the OAS has spoken to this. They've made clear where they are. But I won't speak for them or what the next steps might be inside
But
that.
the U.S. considers Venezuela still a democracy?
Again, we've made clear our concerns about the democratic process in Venezuela and how important it is that the Venezuelan people have a right to choose their future, and they have a right to a more prosperous and a safer future, and that's what we're focused on. And that's why, back to your second question, we're continuing to push for dialogue there.
So,
Okay, Goy, I'll go to you, and then we'll finish up with Matt.
Thank you, sir.
Huh? No, you're done.
I've got South Africa.
You've had how many today?
I've just had two, I think. And one was an interjection. I've got South Africa.
Well, because you interjected, I'm going to dock you.
You're penalized.
Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Two questions. One, Mr. Trump was speaking to Indian American groups in New Jersey, where he said that if he is elected president, then he will have a great relation with India and he will fight out terrorism from the region along with India. So where do we stand today as far as U.S.-India relations are concerned when he's talking about he will have a great relations?
I'm not going to, as you know, speak to the campaign rhetoric or promises or policies that either candidate is making. That's for them and their staffs to speak to. All I can point you to is what we said before, Goyle, about how this administration, and particularly Secretary Kerry, is approaching our bilateral relationship with India, which is very strong, and it's very diverse. We terrific discussions with the Indians down in Kigali, and we got a very aggressive amendment now, and Indian leadership and participation, active participation in those negotiations really got us there. So there's a very robust bilateral relationship that for as long as Secretary Kerry's in office, I can assure you he's going to continue to pursue.
And finally, as far as the BRIC nations meeting or met in Goa, India, and this is the first time that they're all united with India as far as fighting against terrorism from the region, and also including Russia, China, they were all among other BRIC nations. And what they are saying this time, first time in China especially, that there is no distinction between good and bad terrorism. Terrorism is bad always because killing innocent peoples, and those who support them will pay the price. Where do you stand on this?
Where do we stand on whether terrorism is bad?
No, I mean, what are the U.S. views on this BRICS when they're united?
I mean, first of all, I think our position on terrorism and pursuing collaborative, cooperative approaches around the world to combating terrorism are well known and well established. That would be my first point. Second point on the BRIC nations, speaking about that, we welcome both bilateral and multilateral discussions about effective counterterrorism procedures, processes, tactics, policies, the expenditure of resources. All that's to the good if it can be done in a truly collaborative way that has results. So we certainly welcome that kind of multilateral discussion.
Thanks, sir.
Dave, and then
Matt says the White House is addressing my thing.
what's that?
It's the ICC, right?
Yeah.
I think they have. Do you have something on the South Africa wanting to withdraw from the ICC?
I can if you want me to, but if
Go
you
ahead, and then
already.
you can take my question, which is very brief. Oh, don't look so annoyed. It's Friday.
I'm not annoyed. I'm delighted. Delighted, Matt.
So yeah, South Africa wants to, as said, it indicated an intention to pull out of the ICC. Obviously, you're not yourselves members of the ICC, but what does it say about South Africa's leadership and impunity for
Yep.
leaders on the continent?
Yep. Let me find it here. I got so many here. Where is it, Elizabeth?
It's the southern tip of Africa.
Oh, I know where. I can't find it in here.
The ICC is in The Hague.
Yeah, so it might be.
All right, I
it
got
might
it,
be
I got
at
it.
the Hague, it might be-
I found it.
That's in the
I
Netherlands.
just wanted, for the record, that there's no little tab on this. So there was no way that I was going to find it. We've seen the announcement that the South African government has taken steps to initiate its withdrawal from the International Criminal Court. And we're concerned about this decision. The United States greatly values the role that South Africa has played in regard to establishing the ICC, including as a member of the Assembly of States Parties, which pushed the Rome Statute through to ratification, and as the first African country to incorporate the ICC statute into its domestic law. So we're concerned about it.
All right, well, just building on that, I mean, this is the second African country this week to pull out. Burundi did earlier, and then there's lots of speculation that Uganda might also go. Are you concerned, even with the caveat that you're not a member? Are you concerned that there seems to be this rush to leave?
I don't want to get ahead of events, and I don't think we're at a point now where we can, call it a trend. So I don't want to speculate about what other countries may or may not do. These are obviously sovereign decisions. We do think that the ICC has made valuable contributions in the service of accountability in a number of situations, and we hope that other governments would share that analysis.
My question is on Honduras. Last week it was announced that you guys had certified that they were making enough progress on anti-corruption and human rights reforms to warrant the release of aid. And I don't know if you're aware, but the police security forces in Honduras just this week essentially attacked a protest rally, and I'm just wondering if you have any response to that, or if it makes you have second thoughts about the certification.
I don't. So obviously we're concerned about those reports, Matt, and there's no question about that. And we note that the situation there in Honduras is extremely complex, with high rates of impunity, crime, and corruption. There's plenty of work to be done. We're going to continue to press the Honduran government to conduct prompt, thorough, and transparent investigation into cases like this, into homicide cases, and to ensure that those responsible are brought to justice. But I'm not aware that these recent activities will in any way change our certification of September 30th.
Why not?
Well, I mean, because that
it's
certification
a done
that-
deal and you can't go back to it?
No, I didn't, I mean, you can always, you can always revisit. I'm saying, I'm not aware that these recent actions are gonna have any effect on that. And that certification was done to acknowledge that they have in fact taken effective steps to meet the criteria that was specified in the legislation. It doesn't mean, and we said this, I think, at the time, that they have resolved all their problems. It doesn't mean that there isn't still corruption and crime. And as I said, impunity. In fact, there are very serious challenges that remain that are going to require sustained effort and political will.
But this happened after the certification. Is there no concern that
I understand
the
that
government
happened.
may have gotten the certification and said, oh, okay, well, that's all right now, we can go do whatever we want?
I can't speak for
not-
calculus that the
no,
government
I know.
might make after getting the
Yeah,
certification.
but is there
but
concern here that they might have, that might be what's going on?
We are deeply concerned about the continued problems in Honduras from crime, corruption, impunity. There's absolutely no question about that. And we always review our programs as a result of it. As we stand here today, we are comfortable in the certification that we made at the end of last month. But it doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye as we go forward. We always review and assess going forward. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.